Title of the sharing: Narrative Storytelling for Watchdog Journalists. Setting: 2018 Denver Watchdog Workshop. Speaker: Ken Armstrong. Ken Armstrong explained how to craft a narrative when writing an investigative story. He gave tips on how to elevate investigative writing to make it stronger and better. Ken Armstrong is a senior reporter at ProPublica, a non-profit organization based in New York City, where it aims to produce investigative journalism in the public interest. He's won a Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting in year 2016 with his piece of "For a Startling Examination and Exposé of Law Enforcement's Enduring Failures to Investigative Reports of Rape Properly and to Comprehend the Traumatic Effects on Its Victims." He's won Pulitzers for investigative reporting and explanatory reporting, and shared in 2 staff Pulitzers for breaking news. He's won 6 IRE awards. In this conference, he shared his tips on narrative writing techniques that would take your stories to the next level. Investigative Reporters and Editors Inc. is a grassroots non-profit organization dedicated to improving the quality of investigative reporting. IRE was formed in 1975 to create a forum in which journalists throughout the world could help each other by sharing story ideas, news gathering techniques, and news sources. IRE provides members access to thousands of reporting tip sheets and other materials through its resource center and hosts conferences and specialized training throughout the country. Programs of IRE include the National Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting. Ken Armstrong began his sharing by telling a story. A little more than 50 years ago, it was late 1967, Jimmy Webb got a telephone call. He was a great songwriter. The person calling him was Glenn Campbell. Glenn Campbell was calling from a music studio with a request, a really rather odd request because it was so light on details, and Campbell said to Webb on the phone was, "Jimmy, can you write me a song about the town?" That's it. He didn't say what town, he didn't say who's in this town, he didn't say what's happening in this town. He just wants a song about a town. And this is equivalent of working a weekend shift, and because there's a 12-inch news hole to fill, getting a sign or weather story as a news reporter. Jimmy Webb started it, finished it that afternoon, just like a reporter on deadline. The song title was Wichita Lineman, that was released in 1968. There are 4 takeaways from this song for journalists who want to improve their writing. Number 1. Less is more. The lyrics of the song are spare. Using simple language and stringing them together, you will get one of the most memorable lyrics in all of music, similar to our pieces of narratives. Number 2. You don't have to follow convention. You do not need to follow how things usually are. Put things in your own way and it can become famous in its own right. Number 3. Great writing can come from the most mundane origins. Sometimes it's just those awful weekends wherever you go. You cover a parade and you happen to see something you've never seen before. Don't blow off assignments. Don't cast them off and put them on shelves and think that these are just something that I'm going to spend the day with. Every time you write something, you have an opportunity to write something special. Number 4. Writing is teamwork. In Webb's case, he wrote lyrics. Campbell played solo as the song's bridge, and Carol, the bassist, played the song's opening bass line. The next example is a Washington Post story that was published in 2017. It was written last year by John Woodrow Crooks, with the post about a school shooting in South Carolina that happened on a playground and with mostly first graders. Two points were shared by Armstrong regarding this story. Number 1. It's talking about simple language and how it can become so memorable. Look at the second sentence here. The Daisy Scout remembered what her mom had said. If something doesn't feel right, run. That could be the lyric. That could be a haunting lyric. The language is just right, the keys is just right, and it ends on the right note. Number 2. Look for cadence. Look for what hits the ears right. For example, in this case, the last sentence, Ava hoped he was okay. To Armstrong, that was the best sentence in the entire story because it gave the reader the sense that he's not okay. We will keep reading the story to find out the truth. In this part, Armstrong started with a question. How do you keep people reading when you write a longer story? Yeah, what are some ideas that we can use when we're constructing a narrative? This serves as the essence for the following story, as Armstrong will be sharing his 2 stories that he co-wrote. The first story was written in 2012 by Jonathan Warden at the Seattle Times, and it was a Sunday story. It's about 3,000 words. The story about 2 police officers mishandling a welfare check. They were called to check on the welfare of a man who was in psychiatric distress, and they wound up shooting and killing him. According to Armstrong, we need a different approach to cover the story. You need to hold back, you need to create tension, and you need layers of reveal. He met an editor at the Seattle Times. The editor asked him to hold back, which served him as counterintuitive. It's so counter to everything that we learn in journalism, but for narrative, that's critical. You really need to learn how to hold back. He introduced readers to people who were going to meet. It's 2 trains on the same track heading towards each other. It's kind of a classical story construct because it works, such as Doug Olson, who was a history of men with illness. That creates tension. And that's what you need. You need tension. You need a building sense of dread. Not knowing creates tension. It builds drama. A little bit of information about the officers. They were informed that they are going to handle a man who is in a state of psychiatric distress. The readers will then get the sense that these officers may not be the best people to handle a call like this. They may not have the knowledge they need, they may not have the training they need. He then told the reader what the rules of engagement are. We've let the readers know what the rules are, of how to handle a patient who is suffering from mental illness. As the story proceeds, you don't have to tell them. The readers are doing that themselves step by step as they go through the story. From here, you've got your setup. You haven't told your reader that Doug Olson is going to be killed by the end of the story, but they sense so. And they, in order to get to the story's conclusion, they have to read. From here, we do fuller step-back sections on background information of Doug Olson and the police officers. And then, we do a tip-top. We tell readers about what happens in the 4 minutes and 50 seconds, from when the officers arrive to when Doug Olson is shot and killed. We have to put more emotional resonance here at the bottom than if you had used it higher the story. We described about the officer who fired the fatal shot and his guilt after firing the shot, that he should have listened to Doug Olson a bit better. Write the ending before you know the lead, and it helps because you're writing towards an ending. You're making choices and how you construct it that serves that ending. You want the ending to have had every possible piece set up so that pops when the reader gets there. It also saves you a lot of space. If I write my ending first, I'll find that a lot of material that I might otherwise put in the story falls out, because it doesn't lead me to that conclusion. The second story shared by Armstrong was the story that made him and his co-author, T. Christian Miller, that had been awarded a Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting. In this part, he mentioned that the benefits of partnering with other people contributed to the final work of his story. In this 12,000-word story, it has no nut graph. When you are writing a narrative, a nut graph would defeat what you are doing. If you were writing a narrative and you do what a narrative opted, then your readers, at the story's end, can write the nut graph for you. The message should come through in its story itself. You plant questions that the reader has to keep going through the story to get to the answer. You use unresolved action, you split something in two, and you make the reader keep reading to get to the second half of it. You want the readers to get hooked. The story was about Marie, an 80-year-old woman outside of Seattle who reported being raped in 2008. Within a day, police started to suspect her account. They believed that she wasn't telling the truth, and from there, she resents her story. She's charged for filing a false police report. At the end of the story, the readers will find out that she did not lie, but the question is, why wasn't she believed? Create a role of people around the subject. You have to get to the bottom to find out why. The story starts in a central column, then jumped forward in time. What the designers did is that they have the Colorado section of the story in the right-hand column, and when we go to the Washington, they are in the left-hand column. The serial rapist where detectives of Colorado were pursuing and eventually arrest is the same person who had attacked Mary in Washington. In this part, Armstrong pointed out that when the two threads of a story come together, the text moves to the center column. The two braids unite. We move it back together. You have to put your ego on the shelf. You know, as the writer, as a reporter, you think to know the story best. Sometimes an editor comes up with an idea that's just so much better than yours. take the editor's idea. It also helps on the back end. If you're using the editor's outline, life is so much easier. You need to mind the packaging. We don't have a cut line that raises ahead of the story. We don't have any design elements ever that get ahead of the story. So you need to make sure that the headline, the readout, the cut lines, the multimedia elements, everything is in sync with the story that you're telling. You can use different narrative techniques to ground the reader. One thing you can do is you can break the scene in two, like in the end of the Washington section. After this, we're going to jump back over to Colorado. I ended this section with Murray asking the detective a question. Am I in trouble? Now we jump over to Colorado, where we're like 3 years over out of time with this. In long narratives, trying to surprise the reader helps. 12,000 words is a long story. If you're going to hook the reader, you're going to have to surprise them. Not only through layers of reveal, but through things like a shift of perspective. At the end of the story, we tell people what really happened in Murray's bedroom on that morning, in August 2008. You tell it through the eyes of the rapist, we do it through Marco's eyes. It's the same morning being told to you now by Murray. It's audio. It's a 1-minute audio clip where Murray says what happened, so you see it through the rapist's eye, and you hear it through Murray's voice. In the Q&A session, an audience asked Armstrong, people will read longer online than they will on print. How do you judge your character development? How far do you go? Armstrong's answer was, they told the story in 4 different ways: book, online, radio, and a Netflix series. The development of characters were dramatically different each step of the way. In radio, they did not preserve the reveal. They let the power of everyone's voices tell the story. Because hearing those voices is so different from writing about them. In book, you cannot delay the ending. You have to let the story go. Be extensive. He also adds that we had to just pick one ending, trying to find a way at story's end to make sure that you didn't keep going just because you have more than what you wanted to tell. The second question from the audience was, how did the story come to your attention? He has a call letter file with stories that interest him, and he will approach the subjects in the cases after some time. It gives them time to collect, time to reflect, and they are more likely to speak later when they've had a chance to collect than they are in the immediate aftermath. The third question from the audience was, I'm interested when you mentioned that it took her 7 months to agree to talk to you, but what was your overall timeline? Because this was a huge project, so I'm interested to know exactly how long this took you as far as the research, the interviews, and the writing. Armstrong mentioned that it wasn't a clean timeline. He was working on other stories. I was waiting to see if Mary would agree to be interviewed. He then was working on other stories in the meantime. Then when Marie agreed to be interviewed, he pivoted back and he did a number of interviews. The fourth question was curious to know about the technique points that he made, about how to not get stuck in the lead. The answer from Armstrong was, if you got a narrative, try to use index cards or a whiteboard or whatever it is. Break it up into components, break it up into pieces. The pieces can be scenes, it can be a chunk of information that you have to explain, it can be a profile while you're developing someone's character. Whatever it is, take each one of those elements and write it on one index card. Then, move the index cards around so that you can see what is the order that makes the most sense. Then, once you have in order that you kind of like, you just write each of these sections independently. That way you'll never get stuck. Fifth question. So you were talking about keeping your reader along with the narrative. I'm sure you got those from years of experience working with different editors. But how important is data that you can get from the web in making these decisions? I mean, audience data. What you know about how readers interact with your story based on your experience.
If a story is boring, people won't read it, whether it's short or long. If it's not boring, they will read it, whether it's short or long. You just need to make sure that you give them a reason to keep going once they get into it. And a lot of that then becomes the reporting. You not only write for narrative, you need to report for narrative. And once you start to look for dialogue and different narrative techniques, like dialogue is one of the most underused things we use in journalism. It's also one of the most powerful. We almost think of dialogue as something that belongs to fiction writers. I look for dialogue all the time because dialogue is a scene. So I'm always trying to find audio, video, transcripts, whatever I can to find people in scenes where I can then convert it into dialogue. Dialogue's one of our best friends if you're a narrative writer.
Sixth question from the audience. How did the rapist react when you approached him and asked for his side? What did you say to him and how did you get the interview? Armstrong said that he was fortunate in this story because he not only got to talk to the rapist, Maurice spent an extraordinary amount with us talking about what had happened. Armstrong mentioned that the difficult part was to get the police officers in Linwood to talk to them. To get police to not only acknowledge a mistake, but to apologize for it and to speak openly about it.
A lot of times when I approach people, that's sort of what I'm asking them to do. Is like, I'm not here to question you as though I'm a prosecutor. I want to learn. I want to learn about what you did, why you did, so that other people can learn as well. It's a different mindset, and I think a lot of times it really benefits us.
The seventh question is, how do you find stories? You first hear about it because somebody was in the police department. Did that come by the way of a press release? Were you requesting information from the police department, and how did you uncover the first event? Armstrong said that he did nothing to uncover the first one other than to read his own newspaper. She filed a lawsuit in federal court, and then that was written about, that a woman had been raped and not been believed and is now suing the police department. That story was public from early on, very soon after Marco Lurie was arrested and they were able to connect him in Linwood.
It's not perfect, but in general, when we ask for records, we get a good faith response. And because of that, I was able to get a ton of records on this case. For me, it was just a question of wanting to reconstruct the investigation from the first moment to the last to see where it went sideways.
And that's all from Armstrong's sharing. Thanks for listening and watching.